Hello everyone, we are Caleb and Ava. Today's story is deeply unsettling. Have you ever wondered if the world you're in might not be the real world? When you start to question everything around you, time, space, and even the relationships between people, could there be hidden, unexplained secrets? The truth may be scarier than you imagine. Today we're taking you into a story shrouded in fog, leading you into a lost world. Are you ready? Let's lift this fog together. My name's Caleb. I'm 33, and I went to university in London, where I studied journalism. After graduating in 2011, I joined a media company and was sent to Japan. In 2016, I quit my job and switched from being a financial reporter to a financial content creator. I'm not much of a talker. In fact, I can be a bit on the quiet side. Since I quit my job, I've been writing at home, mostly about finance. If I had to compare myself to something, I'd say I'm like a mole, just focused on the little things right in front of me, not really concerned with the big picture. I'm pretty practical, but a strange thing happened to me 2 years ago that, when I really think about it, is crazier than any horror story or movie. Just to clarify, I wrote about it on my blog, but I kept it pretty vague. No one seemed to react strongly at the time, so this time I want to go into more detail. On July 18th, 2019, I went on a business trip to Japan for a green finance forum in Osaka. Looking back, things started to feel off right after I left Tokyo Station on the train. How do I explain it? I suddenly got really depressed, felt terrible, like I'd never make it back. I called my wife and told her not to forget to pick up our son in the afternoon. She seemed to sense something was wrong and asked me what was going on. I told her it was nothing, just that I was worried. Then she called me back again, asking the same thing, and I lied to her. I said I fell asleep on the train and had a bad dream. She laughed at me for it. But honestly, I was a bit tired. I'd stayed up late the night before, writing an article until after 2 a.m., and I thought my bad mood was just from lack of sleep. So I tried to take a nap. But before I could, I went to the restroom. Now remember, I walked forward from my seat, and the bathroom was at the left side of the train car connection. After using the bathroom, I came back to my seat, walking towards the right. I was in car 4, seat 6A, but when I got back, there was this guy, probably in his 50s, sitting in my seat. He had his reading glasses perched on his nose and was frowning while watching a video with the sound blasting. I asked him, "Is this your seat?" He looked up at me and said, "Yeah." I thought maybe he was one of those people who take other people's seats, so I asked, "Which car are you from?" He said, "Car 3. I said, "But this is car 4. He seemed annoyed and said, "Look again." So I turned around to check the electronic sign in the car, and it really did say car 3. I mumbled sorry and quickly turned around to walk away, but inside I was really confused. When I went to the bathroom, I clearly walked forward, but when I came out, I was walking back. So how did I end up in car 3? As I walked into the next car, I spotted a girl in a blue t-shirt right away. She was sitting diagonally across from me by the aisle, and that's when I realized I'd walked into the wrong car. But how could that be? The only explanation I could think of was that when I went to the bathroom had somehow moved from the left side to the right side. But looking at the train's direction, it was still on the left. Plus, if the bathroom had moved, when I came back, I should have seen the backs of seats, not passengers' faces. The only thing that made sense was that the bathroom had moved. Somehow it had shifted from car 4 to car 3. After finding my seat, I thought I'd try the bathroom again. But when I got there, someone was inside. I had to wait a while before a woman came out. I went in, locked the door, and stood there quietly for about a minute, counting seconds, before I stepped out and headed back, this time going the right way. I've noticed that weird things like this always happen when you're not paying attention. When you finally realize something's off, the more you think about it, the more confused you get, and you just end up thinking, you must have remembered it wrong. I sat back down in my seat. still feeling like I was probably just too tired and had gotten mixed up. So, I closed my eyes again, hoping to sleep it off. A long time passed. The noise of the train was interrupted by a man's voice, rough and raspy. It sounded like he was on the phone with a woman, talking about taking her to Hawaii or something. From his tone, it was clear they weren't a married couple. On a train, it's the perfect time to chat with a lover. You can't really do anything else. You need to kill time. Your spouse isn't there, and there's no one around who knows you. It's like catching up on all the things you normally miss. But as I kept listening, I started to get confused. The guy on the phone started telling the other person about a violent incident. Apparently, a man had been scammed out of tens of thousands of dollars by a woman. He happened to run into her on the 4th floor of a mall, where she was shopping for lipstick. He rushed over and grabbed her, and they got into a struggle. A crowd gathered, but no one stopped them. In the end, the man dragged her out of the store. That's when the mall security showed up. And in a fit of rage, the man pushed the woman over the glass railing. She fell to her death right then and there. Tragedies like this happen in society all the time. It's nothing too shocking. But what stunned me was, he was talking about something that hadn't even happened yet. He started the story like this. The day after tomorrow, the man will have lunch at the mall next to his house. He was planning to eat at the restaurant on the 5th floor, but when he gets to the 4th floor, he will spot the woman. She will be trying on lipstick in a store. The voice was coming from somewhere behind and to the side of me, at least one row of seats away. I'd have to stand up to see who it was, but I didn't move. I didn't want to lose the drowsy feeling I had, so I just kept listening. Then, he went on about the victim. She hadn't planned to buy lipstick. She was actually going to meet someone at a cafe on the 1st floor of the mall. Her boss had told her that the meeting would be with a professor, someone who had lived alone for many years, had a lot of savings, and whom she needed to hook. Since she would have some time to kill, she decided to pop up to the 4th floor and buy some lipstick. If it weren't for the weird time thing mentioned earlier, I'd have thought these two were just talking about a script. But I was sure this wasn't the case. The guy was talking about events that hadn't happened yet, like when he mentioned the victim. Tomorrow, her brother will visit her house, and her little niece will secretly grab her favorite lipstick and start drawing on the wall with it, completely ruining the lipstick. At this point, I was wide awake. The drowsiness had completely worn off, and I was fully absorbed in the story. Then the man started talking about the victim's little niece, and the story just got weirder. Apparently, the niece somehow figured out that her aunt's death had something to do with the lipstick. She was terrified and went into a long depression. As she grew up, she never wore lipstick, not even makeup. Her personality changed too. She got weird, had 3 failed marriages, and her 4th marriage only lasted a bit over 2 years before her husband died of illness. Then the man went on to talk about her 2nd husband, how the niece would once encounter him on her way to her aunt's house when they were kids. He had been just a little boy back then, but he would raise a plastic gun at her and start making shooting noises, da-da-da-da. So, according to him, this was all going to happen the day after tomorrow. The guy kept talking, now moving on to the niece's child with her 2nd husband. I finally stood up and looked around behind me, but I couldn't see anyone on the phone. How strange. I sat back down, put my headphones on, and tried to block out the voice. By the time we passed Kyoto Station, I finally fell asleep listening to Beethoven's piano music. But I had a nightmare. It was like there was this long red brick wall stretching out endlessly in both directions. It wasn't very tall, just enough to block my view, and I felt like I could easily climb over it. But no matter how I tried, I couldn't get over it. It was like the wall itself was part of the nightmare. Finally, I arrived in Osaka. It was my first time in Western Japan, and the city felt like it had a blue-gray tint to it. There were loud voices everywhere. I stayed near the train station, and the next day I went to the conference. By the evening I had some free time, so I went out on my own. I walked for about a station's distance, had a bowl of hot ramen, and was about to head back to the hotel when I realized I'd gotten lost. The streets were becoming more and more unfamiliar, and I couldn't find my way back. I went into a nearby glasses shop and asked the staff. There were 3 women working there, 2 in their 30s and 1 in her 20s, but none of them had ever heard of the hotel I was staying at. After I left, I saw a traffic cop standing at an intersection not far ahead, so I walked over to ask him. The cop was young and quite handsome, but he said he didn't know either. I took out my hotel keycard and handed it to him. He looked at the address and said, "That place is far. You should take a taxi." I was a bit confused. It suddenly hit me. I had that strange experience on the train with the bathroom, and now was I getting Alzheimer's at such a young age? I asked him, "How far is it?" He replied, "This is the western suburbs. It's at least 15 kilometers from here." I said, "That's not right. I haven't walked that far from the hotel." The cop gave me a strange look and said, "Then how did you end up here?" I thanked him and left the intersection. I opened my phone's navigation app, typed in my hotel, and sure enough, it was exactly as the cop said. Just then, a taxi pulled up next to me. The driver, with a strong local accent, asked loudly, "Where to, boss?" I glanced at him and suddenly got a chill. It was so familiar. I was sure I had seen him before, and not long ago, but I just couldn't place him. He saw that I wasn't answering and gave me a smile. "Where to?" he asked again. I went straight for it and asked, "Have we met before?" He looked me over for a second and then said, "Too many passengers every day, I can't remember." I kept staring at him, trying hard to remember. Hotel? Green Finance Forum? Osaka taxi driver? Why couldn't I figure it out? I said, "Think again. We've definitely met." He raised an eyebrow, looking irritated now. "Are you getting in or not?" And just in that moment, it hit me. This was the guy from car 3, seat 6A on the train. I said, "You really don't remember me?" He shifted the car into gear, ready to go. "You're not serious." Before he could even release the clutch, I pulled open the door and jumped in quickly. Why did this guy look so much like the one from the train? I needed to figure this out, or it would bug me. He told me to hurry up and asked, "Where to?" I told him, "The Red Pine Tree Hotel near the train station." He started the car and drove off. I then asked him, "Hey, have you been out lately?" He casually said, "I went to Tokyo 2 months ago, what's up?" I asked her, "When did you get back?" He answered, "I was there for 3 days, didn't find anything fun. Everything was just a long line." From the way he spoke and his expression, he really did seem like just a regular taxi driver. I wanted to test him a bit, so I suddenly said, "I was on the same train as you when you came back." He looked back at me surprised and said, "Really?" I replied, "You don't remember?" I got confused and thought your seat was mine. He looked back again and said, "I think you've got the wrong person." I asked, "You were in car 3, right?" He said, "I can't really remember that." I looked at him through the rearview mirror and thought he seemed a bit younger, around 40. I asked, "Do you have a brother?" He shook his head, saying, "I only have 2 sisters. Looks like I just ran into 2 people who looked pretty alike." After a while, I asked, "How much further?" He said, "If there's no traffic, just a few minutes." I didn't say anything else. The neon lights outside were flashing past quickly, and I started mumbling to myself again. I definitely walked at least 1 station away from the hotel, so why did I end up in a taxi? Eventually, he slowed down and said, "We're here." I looked up, and for a second, I felt dizzy. Not in the figurative sense, but actually dizzy. I saw the sign for the Red Pine Tree Hotel, but the building and the surrounding area were definitely not the hotel I had stayed in. Could there be 2 Red Pine Tree hotels in Osaka? At that moment, I suddenly had no idea where I was. I said, "Bro, this isn't it." He replied, "This is it." I said, "I told you before I got in the taxi. It's near the train station." He drove a few meters forward, then slightly bent over, pointing into the distance, and said, "Isn't that the train station?" I looked and sure enough saw Osaka Station. It was less than 500 meters away from us. In that instant, I felt completely lost and said, "Okay, I'll get out and take a look." I paid the fare and got out of the car. The taxi immediately drove off. I was all alone now, and I looked around at this hotel again, very sure that I had never seen it before. I wasn't planning to keep looking for my original hotel. After all, I only had a backpack in my hand. I could just find another place to stay. It was already pretty late, and right in front of me there was another hotel, so I just walked in, I checked in, got a standard room, showed my ID, and then something strange happened again. When I took the key card, it said 307, and the room I had at the other Red Pine Tree Hotel was also 307. I pulled out the other key card and compared them. They were exactly the same, including the address and phone number. I was getting pretty pissed off. Was this some kind of double charge? I didn't make a fuss about it though. I took the elevator to the 3rd floor, tried the old key card first. Nothing happened. Then I used the new key card, and it worked. I opened the door, and thankfully the room was different. It was smaller. I dropped my bag on the bed, picked up the phone to call my wife and tell her about the weird stuff happening, but then I thought maybe it would worry her, so I decided against it. After thinking for a bit, I went back downstairs. I went up to the front desk and asked the girl who'd checked me in earlier, "Is this a chain hotel?" She shook her head and said, "No, it's not." I asked, "Is there another Red Pine Tree Hotel nearby?" She said, "That's not possible, right?" I pulled out the key card from the other Red Pine Tree Hotel and handed it to her. "Take a look at this card." She took it, looked at it, and said, "This is our hotel's card." I said, "No, this is from a different Red Pine Tree Hotel." She started typing away at the computer, and sure enough, it didn't match. She probably thought I'd copied the card, and her expression became more cautious. I took the card back, threw it in the nearby trash can and said, "Thanks." Then I just walked out. As much as I hated to admit it, I had to accept that something was wrong with the world. I wasn't going to sleep. I thought about walking around near the train station. It's so busy there. But as soon as I stepped out of the hotel, I ran into another strange event. Since the train toilets could move and the hotel could be swapped out, was the train station still the same train station? There was a barbecue joint across from the hotel. No customers in sight. But the owner was still there, grilling away in a smoky haze. At first I didn't really get a good look at him, but then he looked up at me and I froze. Wasn't he the taxi driver who had tried to pick me up earlier? Now he was wearing a white t-shirt, looking all dirty. Had he gone back to selling barbecue after dropping me off? Then it hit me. No wonder he drove off so quickly after I got out of the taxi. He must have been in a rush to change clothes. As soon as we made eye contact, he couldn't help but laugh, then quickly looked away, lowering his head. He didn't want me to see him laughing. I felt a bit more relaxed, though. His laugh had this mischievous vibe to it. That was fine. No matter what his purpose was, as long as I knew he was human, I wouldn't be so scared. I walked straight up to him. When I was standing in front of him, he casually said, "Wanna sit?" I took a good look at him. Something was off. Although he looked a lot like that taxi driver, he was younger, probably in his 30s. Could he be the taxi driver's younger brother? I asked him straight up, "Do you have an older brother who drives a taxi?" He said, "Nope." I asked again, "Do you have 2 older sisters?" He froze for a second and said, "How do you know that?" I suddenly had a terrifying thought. What if all 3 people I'd met were actually the same person, just at different times in his life? Maybe in his 30s he ran the barbecue shop, in his 40s he switched to driving a taxi, and by the time he was in his 50s he stopped working and just traveled around. The more I thought about it, the more scared I became. The more everything seemed to make sense. The hotel I stayed at earlier was a Red Pine Tree Hotel from many years in the future. It had been renovated, and the surrounding environment had completely changed. That's why the key card I had before couldn't open the door now. So, where was I? Not in terms of place, but in terms of time. The barbecue shop owner had stopped messing with the skewers and asked, "How do you know I have two older sisters?" I forced a smile and said, "Just a lucky guess." He lowered his head and went back to work, muttering, "So rude." When I get scared, my instinct is to run. I couldn't stay. I had to go. I had to get back to Tokyo. I needed to see my son. But how could I get there? I left the barbecue shop, walked down the street and tried calling my wife. It rang for a while, but she didn't pick up. It was only 10 o'clock. She shouldn't be asleep. I tried searching for her phone on my own, repeatedly shaking it, but still no response. Then it hit me. What if we weren't in the same world anymore? I stood there in confusion for a moment, then opened my phone to navigate to Osaka Station. It was only 5 kilometers away. I borrowed a bike from the hotel, set Google Maps for the route, and started riding. I passed Maple Avenue, 3rd Street, Daisy Drive. All the while I was keeping an eye out for anything, trying to find some clue or error. The shops were brightly lit, the cars on the road rushed past, couples were strolling on the sidewalks, and lonely people hurried along. No one seemed to notice me noticing them. I finally reached the Osaka Station ticket hall, planning to buy the next ticket to Tokyo, the 10:52 p.m. train. But the nearby students were on summer break, and there were no tickets left. Just then, a young guy came up to me, mumbling under his breath, "Ticket? Ticket? Ticket?" I watched him cautiously. He didn't look anything like the mysterious man I'd seen in his 30s, 40s, and 50s, so I relaxed. I asked if he had a ticket to Tokyo, and he told me to wait. He quickly made a phone call, and soon another guy in his 20s showed up. He looked young, but as soon as I saw him, I immediately recognized him. He was the taxi driver. I'd almost gotten used to this world's strange logic, so I just looked at him curiously, not afraid anymore. To him, I was just some unlucky guy who couldn't get a train ticket. He asked how many tickets I needed. I said, "Just one." He glanced around and then showed me the ticket, but I couldn't really tell if it was real. I asked him how much it cost, and his price was nearly double what it should have been. I paid him through my phone and quietly said, "I didn't think you'd be selling second-hand tickets." He didn't seem to catch what I said. He just took the money and quickly walked out of the ticket hall. I quickly walked out of the ticket hall, and as I crossed the plaza, there were passengers everywhere. I didn't see him again. I made my way from the entrance to the waiting area, found a seat and closed my eyes, trying to process all these strange events. I knew I wasn't time traveling. If this was decades ago, there's no way that ticket seller could have done a transaction with me via phone. It felt like I was witnessing a person's past, present, and future in a normal world. Who knows what was going on? At that moment, I didn't have any other thoughts except getting back to Tokyo as soon as possible. I don't know when, but I suddenly heard the sound of a game from behind me. I turned around and saw a boy, about 10 years old, sitting in the row behind me, completely engrossed in his phone. I stared at him for a while, and my head started spinning again. If this boy stood next to the man I saw in car 3, seat 6A on the train, who was in his 50s, I wouldn't have guessed they were the same person. But with the taxi driver, the barbecue shop owner, and now the ticket seller, it all clicked together. Yes, he was the same person as the ticket seller, just when he was a child. I realized that the barbecue shop owner was actually the same guy as the taxi driver and the older man I saw in the train's car 3, seat 6A. At that moment, I was terrified beyond belief. But after seeing the ticket seller and now this boy, I wasn't so scared anymore. Maybe you don't get it, but what I fear most is becoming odd myself. Right now, I was just seeing this amazing person change from old to young. Maybe I entered a distorted world, but as long as I felt normal, I was okay with it. The The boy was sitting next to a middle-aged man who seemed like a decent, humble guy. He was probably the boy's father. There was also a girl, about 13 or 14, holding an iPad, also playing a game. I struck up a conversation with the father. "Hey, are these two kids yours?" He looked at me and said, "Yeah, they're on summer break, so I brought them to Tokyo for a bit." I pointed to the boy and said, "He's really good at his game." The boy was so focused on playing, he didn't even acknowledge the adults talking. His father smiled and said, "We usually don't let them play, but we're letting them enjoy themselves now." I asked, "Are these your only two kids?" He replied, "No, I've got an older daughter too. She's with her mum in Singapore at my mother-in-law's." This boy had two older sisters. I was even more sure now. Just then, my train started boarding. Before I left, I took one last look at the boy. He was still engrossed in his game, unaware of the strange things I was experiencing. I felt a little sad inside. At his age, he should have been full of dreams, but I could already see that his future wasn't going to shine. The train I was on came from another region, and many passengers had already fallen asleep. I found my seat and laid down. Soon, the train pulled out of Osaka Station. The noisy crowds quieted down, leaving only the sound of the train clattering along the tracks, along with some snoring from an unknown seat. At that point, I was itching to get back to Tokyo, thinking that once I left Osaka, everything would go back to normal. Little did I know, there were even stranger things waiting for me. I tossed and turned for over an hour, still unable to sleep. I pulled out my phone to check, but my wife still hadn't called me back, which was odd. Then I felt the urge to use the bathroom, so I carefully got up and unsteadily walked toward the restroom at the end of the car. After finishing up, I stepped out cautiously, checking the electronic display for the carriage number to make sure everything was correct before heading back to my seat. Once I returned to my seat, I gently lay down. The snoring continued, but now there were two women softly chatting. Their seats were probably next to mine. I listened for a while. One of them was pregnant, about 20 weeks along. She already had two daughters, but her husband was hoping for a son, so that's why she was pregnant with this one. The other woman told her it was best not to go out too much at this stage. The pregnant woman said she kept feeling nauseous, craving her mother's cooking. She was flying to visit her parents in Tokyo. A thought suddenly crossed my mind. Could this baby in her belly be the same boy who was playing games earlier? I didn't know the boy's name, and this unborn child didn't have a name either. There was no way to confirm it, but somehow I felt sure that my guess was right. They talked for a long time before finally going quiet. I lay there, still listening to the snoring, while my mind wandered again. I thought about Newton, Einstein, Tesla, men who all believed in a creator. If there is a creator, then why would he make me experience this disorienting confusion? What was the purpose? I couldn't make sense of it. Thanks to the strength of my biological clock, I eventually drifted off to sleep, though it was blurry and restless. I'm not sure how much time passed, but I suddenly woke up and realized the train had stopped. What station was this? I shook off the drowsiness and noticed the snoring had stopped. Had that person gotten off? I turned to look at the other seat, and it was empty. My heart skipped a beat, and I quickly looked around. My seat was empty too. I sat up and walked into the aisle. The aisle was completely empty. I looked around in both directions. Every seat was vacant. Was this the final stop? I looked outside. It was dark, no lights anywhere. My first thought was that some virus had leaked on the train, and all the passengers had escaped, leaving me behind. I grabbed a blanket to cover my mouth, then grabbed my bag and ran forward. Sure enough, there wasn't a single passenger on the train, nor any staff members. Panic set in. I wasn't sure how many carriages I passed, but eventually I reached the driver's cabin. The light blue metallic door had a small round window surrounded by a rubber seal. Through it, I could only see a bunch of complex instruments, but no driver. Then I spotted an open door and immediately ran out. Outside it was desolate, a wasteland. The ground near the train was covered in gravel, and further away there was tall, wild grass. Beyond that, nothing but darkness. Where did all the passengers go? What kind of place was this? I tossed the blanket aside and pulled out my phone, but there was no signal. I trudged forward, carefully stepping along the train, and eventually found it had stopped in front of a brick wall. The memory of a dream I once had rushed back to me, and I quickly walked toward the wall, stopping under it. I estimated it to be about 2 meters high, kind of like a prison wall. I looked around but couldn't see the end of it. I pulled out my phone and snapped a picture of the wall. When I looked at the photo, my blood ran cold. The wall looked like a mirror. My reflection was in the photo, capturing myself while I took the picture. I couldn't take another shot. I had to climb over this wall. There was no rational reason for it, but I felt that anyone who had been through what I had would think the same. Climb over. I jumped up, grabbing the top of the wall, doing a pull-up, and then hooking one leg over the edge. Finally, I managed to get over. There were no buildings outside either. I took a picture of the ground with my phone, and it looked like a vast desert. I looked out into the distance, but honestly, I didn't dare explore any further into the darkness. After thinking for a moment, I climbed back up the wall, planning to return. But before I could jump down, I froze. I noticed that the train was completely gone, and I saw everything and everyone in this world. What does that even mean? It's really hard to describe the spatial logic I experienced. It was as though everything I saw was being displayed on some kind of screen, like countless surveillance footage showing what was happening all over the world, from birth to death, for every person. The images were two-dimensional, but the people and objects in them were three-dimensional. So it was hard to tell what was real or fake. Or maybe it was like a multi-angle movie that I watched in a single instant, and all the scenes were immediately stored in my mind. Maybe someone would ask, did it appear in the sky? Or was there a huge screen, like in a movie theater? I can't say for sure, but this world felt a bit like half a basketball. Everything was happening on a hemispherical surface. Then it hit me. The wall was the edge of the world, and beyond it was the universe itself. The most naive yet terrifying thing was that this place was only separated from our world by a regular red brick wall. Maybe this is something the human brain just can't handle. I immediately felt a sharp headache, and my consciousness began to blur. In the final moment, I saw myself in this world. I was lying in a hospital in Tokyo, in a vegetative state, and beside me was a man. He was the same one from car 3, seat 6A, but older now. I recognized him as Bob, 64 years old. I fell off the wall and immediately lost consciousness. I woke up on the afternoon of July 21st. I was lying in a hospital bed, with my wife sitting beside me. When I opened my eyes, she nervously called my name. Caleb. There was an oxygen mask on my face, and I was hooked up to an IV. I tried to nod, but my neck wouldn't cooperate. Then I saw her rush out and start shouting. She was calling for the doctor. After I left Tokyo, my wife couldn't reach me. She reported me missing to the police. But when they checked the train records, they found no information about my ticket for that day, nor did they find any records for my accommodation in Osaka, any news about the Green Finance Forum, or my train return journey. It wasn't until about 5 a.m. on July 21st that someone found me unconscious by the railroad tracks, about 15 kilometers from Tokyo Station, near the edge of the city, around Miyuki Park. This person immediately called the police. I was rushed to the Tokyo Railway Hospital, and the police contacted my wife right away. When she arrived, I was in a vegetative state, which terrified her. She thought I might never wake up. So what was that train I took on July 18? What place in Osaka did I go to? What hotel was the Red Pine Tree Hotel I stayed at? What was that forum I attended? What was the train I took on July 20? No matter what others say, I firmly believe I went to Osaka, and I went beyond this world. That place didn't lack direction like up, down, left or right. It was just like outside the walls of my neighborhood. I had proof. Once I could move a little, I asked my wife to bring me my phone. But when I searched through it, I couldn't find the selfie I took under the red brick wall. At that moment, I started losing my confidence. It seemed like everything was just a hallucination caused by my brain in some kind of idle state. But why did I faint near those railroad tracks in the middle of Tokyo? I still wasn't convinced. I asked my wife, "This hospital room used to be for 2 people, right?" She replied, "Yes, it did." I said, "He didn't make it, did he? He passed away this morning." My wife looked surprised. "Did you hear that?" I replied, "I didn't hear it, I saw it." She said, "That means you were already awake." I said, "Go check if his family has left. Help me verify this. This man is from Osaka. His name is Bob. He's 64 years old. He's the youngest child in his family with 2 sisters. His grandmother lives in Singapore. When he was about 10, his father took him and one of his sisters to Tokyo for a trip. When he was in his 20s, he was selling train tickets at Osaka Station. Around 30, he ran a barbecue stand near the station. In his 40s, he drove a taxi in Osaka. At 50, he came to Tokyo at least once to visit his older sister, who had married and moved there. He's had cerebrovascular issues for years, which led to his consciousness problems this year. He came to Tokyo for treatment and unexpectedly passed away here. My wife was increasingly confused. "Do you know this person?" I said, "Just go ask, hurry." She said, "Say it again, I can't remember." So I repeated it to her like a memorized speech. Only then did she rush out. About half an hour later, she returned and told me she had searched everywhere. The man's family had already taken his body to the funeral home and left. It was over. There was no one left to corroborate. I spent 2 weeks in the hospital before I was finally able to go home. My in-laws had been helping us take care of the kids, and after I was discharged, they returned to London. As time passed, life slowly returned to normal for the 3 of us. My mind, which had been clouded, started to clear up. The hallucinations I had experienced turned into the sky, and the reality before me became solid ground. My thoughts became sharper. But there was one small problem. Whenever my wife and I were together and talked about the strange things I went through during my coma, I noticed that she always avoided eye contact. I asked her about it, and she always said there was nothing to it. About 2 months later, one night, I was sound asleep when she suddenly shook me awake. I asked her, "Can't sleep?" She said, "Yeah." I said, "Let me give you a massage." Whenever she had trouble sleeping, I'd give her a massage and she would fall asleep quickly. It always worked. I was about to get up when she suddenly grabbed my arm. I asked, "You don't want it?" She hesitated for a while before speaking. "Actually, while you were in the hospital, I found the family of that old man in your ward." I immediately focused on her face. "What did they say?" My wife hesitated before answering. "His situation was exactly like what you described." For some reason, in that moment, my heart suddenly felt heavy and desolate, just like that endless, dark desert I had seen beyond the red brick wall. Seeing that I wasn't saying anything, she quietly asked, "Do you know anything else?" I hugged her tightly. "No, I don't know. I don't know anything."